Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Blossom sat by the window, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her teacup as she watched the rain dance against the glass. Her heart was heavy with a familiar weight when Sammy entered the room, flashing a bright smile. My family's planning a weekend trip. It's sort of a getaway, resort relaxation and business, he said casually, dropping onto the couch. You should come. Blossom looked at him with cautious eyes. It wasn't the first time she'd been invited into his world, and every time she stepped into it, she came back more bruised, emotionally, if not physically. Karen, his mother, had never warmed up to her. Neither had his sister Anita. They saw her as too simple, too ordinary. Her silence, mistaken for weakness, had become their excuse to tread over her like dirt. I don't think they want me there, Blossom said gently, her voice calm but distant. They barely speak to me when we're in the same room. Sammy sighed, brushing her concerns off like dust. Come on, Blossom, you're my wife. They'll come around. But they hadn't in the 3 years since their quiet wedding. She had no grand ceremony, no gold lace gel, no pride from her in-laws, only sideways glances, whispered judgments, and forced smiles for photos. Still, she nodded slowly. Okay, she replied, though every fiber of her being screamed no. She didn't agree for Karen, or for Anita, or even for Sammy's peace of mind. She agreed for herself. This time, she wasn't going as the outsider. She was going to watch. To wait. And maybe, just maybe, to finally show them who she really was. Blossom stood at the gate of Sammy's family house, clutching the strap of her handbag as if it were her last shield. The house loomed before her, not just in its physical grandeur, but in the unspoken air of rejection that seemed to hang in every corner of its compound. The driver opened the gate, and Sammy strolled in with ease, his voice calling out, "Mum, we're here." Blossom followed behind, quiet like an afterthought. Karen appeared first, her face plastered with a half-hearted smile. "Oh," she said dryly, looking past Sammy to Blossom. "You brought her." Anita came next, arms folded, eyebrows slightly raised. "Wow, no warning," she muttered. Blossom smiled politely, saying nothing, but her throat tightened. As she stepped inside, she overheard Karen's sharp whisper to Anita. "Couldn't she have at least worn something that doesn't look like it came from a market stall?" Anita chuckled in agreement. Even the maid has better fashion sense. Dinner that night was unbearable. The long oak dining table stretched too wide, but even that distance couldn't hide the cold glances shot her way. Blossom had helped herself to a modest plate of rice and fish, while the others heaped servings and shared loud stories. She was never addressed directly, only referred to as she or your wife whenever Karen or Anita needed to make a point. When Sammy asked for water, Karen turned to Blossom. "Since you're just sitting there, dear, could you be useful and get it?" Her voice was coated in mock politeness. Sammy didn't flinch. Blossom rose silently and fetched the water. As she poured it into his glass, she noticed his phone light up, group chats with his siblings, all laughing about memes. Her name wasn't mentioned, but the chuckles around the table when she spilled a drop didn't need words. "We'll be leaving for the resort at dawn," Karen said finally, standing and brushing imaginary lint off her blouse. "Let's try not to embarrass ourselves in front of actual company." Blossom looked down at her plate, appetite gone. She had only just arrived, but the weight of exclusion already threatened to break her open. The morning sun filtered through the guest room blinds as Blossom folded the last of Sammy's shirts into his suitcase. He had left earlier with Promise and Anita to sort out logistics, while Karen had conveniently declared herself too tired to do anything domestic. That left Blossom, as usual, in the middle of chaos. The hallway was cluttered with handbags, toiletries, and baskets of snacks, none of which were hers. She moved from room to room, picking up everyone's things, even wiping down the cooler boxes they would use to carry Karen's cooked meals. "Don't forget the chin-chin," Karen yelled from the kitchen. "And please arrange the fresh juice in the cooler upright. The last time someone let it spill, it stained the whole trunk." Blossom bit her tongue, nodding. "Yes, ma'am," she said, even though she wasn't a maid. No one else lifted a finger. By noon, her back ached and her palms were sticky with sweat, but the family showed no sign of acknowledging her efforts. Anita strolled into the lounge with freshly painted nails and sunglasses pushed up on her head. "Is the food packed?" she asked, not even directing it at anyone in particular. Blossom, balancing a tray of Zobo bottles, replied, "Almost done." Anita scoffed. "You should have started earlier. We can't afford to look unorganized in front of real guests." Karen added without looking up from her phone, "And make sure you don't mix up the bags like last time. I don't want to end up wearing that rag you call a kaftan." Blossom didn't argue. She continued loading the final items, slipping her small duffel bag, containing only 2 dresses, 1 scarf, and a pair of flats, under the seat where no one would see. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to observe. "Hurry up," Promise called from outside, honking the car horn. Blossom took one last breath, wiped her brow with the edge of her sleeve, and stepped out. She had packed for a trip they would never forget, but not for the reasons they imagined. The van was spacious, but somehow Blossom found herself squeezed between the luggage and the window, while Anita and Karen sat up front beside Promise and Sammy. Music blared from the car speakers, songs Blossom didn't care for, and loud conversation filled the air, yet none of it included her. Anita's perfume clouded the air like a territorial warning, and every now and then she tossed her braids and laughed dramatically at something Sammy said. "You know, I still can't believe he chose you," Anita teased, glancing back at Blossom. "You were so quiet in uni, I thought you were someone's cousin, not a wife candidate." The van erupted in laughter, except for Blossom, who managed a soft, hollow smile. "Yeah, Blossom's more of a behind-the-scenes type," Sammy added, chuckling. That one stung. As the journey stretched on, so did her tasks. "Blossom, pass the meat pie." "Can you open this bottle for me? Did you pack extra serviettes?" They didn't speak to her. They spoke through her. When the car hit a bump, the cooler shifted, and Anita shrieked. "Watch it. That's the Jolliffe." Blossom held it in place with her knee, her wrist pressed awkwardly against the window pane. She felt more like a service provider than a passenger. At a rest stop, she stepped out to stretch her legs, and an old woman selling fried plantain offered her a smile. "Nah, you they do everything," she asked kindly. Blossom nodded, a sad laugh escaping her lips. "Nami." She bought 2 small bags of plantain chips and re-entered the car. No one said thank you when she handed them out. Instead, Karen asked, "Did you wash your hands?" Blossom nodded. "I did." "Good," Karen replied curtly. "We can't afford food poisoning on this trip." Blossom looked out the window as the hills rolled by. They were nearing the resort, and though none of them knew it yet, the road they were on led straight to reckoning. The resort gates swung open with a smooth, automated hum, revealing an expansive stretch of luxury that shimmered under the afternoon sun. The grounds were landscaped to perfection, with tall palm trees framing a central fountain that danced with water jets. But no one in the van commented on the beauty. Karen adjusted her sun hat and muttered, "I hope the rooms are as good as the pictures." Anita whipped out her phone to record Instagram stories, posing her face beside the car window. "This better be 5 stars," she added. Blossom, still boxed in by coolers and bags, took a deep breath. The air was cleaner here, full of salt and hibiscus. It smelled like home, but also like distance. As soon as the car stopped, the family jumped out, stretching and chatting about the spa and the dinner menu. No one waited for Blossom. She climbed out quietly and began unloading the luggage. Within minutes, the resort staff came out with trolleys and offered to help. "Let them manage the bags," one staffer said, reaching for Karen's suitcase. But Karen waved him off. "We have someone for that," she replied, turning to Blossom with a pointed glance. "Don't mix up the rooms, dear." Sammy didn't speak. Promise was already admiring the lobby. Blossom, too familiar with humiliation, nodded and started sorting bags. She carried not just her own, but 3 others. Her arms ached, but her face remained composed. A male staffer tried to take one from her, but she murmured quietly, "Please, not yet." He paused, recognizing her voice. His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and stepped back without a word. Upstairs, Blossom was assigned the smallest room, next to the kitchen staff quarters, while the rest of the family was given suites with balconies and ocean views. She doesn't mind, Karen said before Blossom could respond. She likes quiet places. Isn't that right, Blossom? Blossom smiled tightly. Of course. She closed the door behind her, dropped the bags gently, and leaned her back against the wall. The walls were plain, the bed narrow. But the silence was golden. Because soon, everything would change. That night, the resort organized a private bonfire for premium guests. Blossom was not invited. Or rather, she was expected to attend only to help distribute drinks and keep things tidy. "Since you're already good with your hands," Anita had said with a smirk, handing her a tray of wine glasses. Sammy had slipped off earlier to speak with one of the resort's event coordinators, and Karen was busy making herself the center of every conversation. Blossom, dressed in a simple cotton dress and flat slippers, moved among the laughing guests unnoticed. Or worse, noticed only when someone wanted a refill. The flames crackled in the background, casting shadows that danced on the walls of the open courtyard. Laughter erupted now and then, sharp, shrill, and pointed. It was during one of those moments that Blossom, while passing behind a hedge to return empty glasses, paused at the sound of her name. "She's not even one of us," Karen was saying. Her voice was unmistakable, low, sharp, and dripping with disdain. I begged Sammy not to marry her. What does she bring to the table, really? No class, no family name. She just stands there looking lost. Anita laughed beside her, her words cutting even deeper. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if she's even educated. The way she acts so timid, like a stray we picked up. Blossom froze, the tray trembling in her hand. Promise's fiancé? Now that's a woman you showcase. Not this, low-budget maid. Karen sighed dramatically. Sammy could have had better, but he settled. And now we all have to deal with it. Blossom backed away slowly, her eyes stinging. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she returned to the staff service area, placed the tray down carefully, and looked into the mirror by the sink. She straightened her back, fixed her posture, and whispered to herself, "You are not what they call you." Then, slowly, she turned and walked out into the night, not defeated, but quietly, deliberately holding herself together until the right time came to break the silence. The next morning, the sun rose soft and golden over the resort. While the rest of the family lingered in their rooms, Blossom stepped out early, wearing a plain blouse and loose trousers. She walked along the garden trail toward the resort's administrative wing. The gardener spotted her from afar and straightened up immediately. "Madam Blossom," he greeted with a subtle nod. She gave a small smile, putting a finger gently to her lips. "Not yet, Ben," she whispered. "Let's keep things quiet for now." Ben nodded in understanding. He'd been working on the grounds since her father first built the place. "Of course, madam. They don't know?" Blossom shook her head. "They think I'm just tagging along. I'll let them keep thinking that. For now." She walked away slowly, her heels silent on the tiled path. At the staff entrance, a young woman handed her the daily operations file. "Everything's running on schedule," she said. "Security, dining, bookings, all in place." Blossom nodded, then handed the file back. "Good. I want the MD's suite prepared. I'll be shifting there by Friday." The woman blinked. "Yes, ma'am. No questions asked. No hesitation." Everyone in the resort knew who Blossom truly was, except the people she'd arrived with. Later that day, while Blossom quietly cleared plates from a family brunch on the balcony, another staff member approached with a slight bow. "Madam Blossom, sorry, Miss. One of the vendors is asking if the partnership meeting will still hold." Karen, sipping on her cocktail, narrowed her eyes. "Partnership meeting." The staff member stiffened. Blossom glanced up calm. "They're likely referring to the MD's meeting with Promise's team," she said smoothly. "Some names got mixed up during scheduling." The staff member quickly nodded. "Yes, miss. I'll confirm and update them." He scurried away. Anita laughed. "Even the workers are confused. You blend in with them so well, Blossom." Karen snorted. "Honestly, they should just hire you here full-time. At least you'd be useful." Blossom smiled. "Maybe they already have." She excused herself and returned inside, the echo of her own words settling in the air like truth just out of reach. Beneath every insult, every snub, she was carving out the perfect moment. This silence was not a weakness. It was a strategy. By the second day of the trip, the family had comfortably fallen into a rhythm that excluded Blossom completely. They lounged in the pool cabanas, giggling over cocktails, while she remained seated at the far end of the patio, occasionally called upon for errands. That morning, as Anita announced she had booked a deluxe spa session for the ladies, Blossom felt a flicker of hope. "Can I join you?" she asked quietly, her voice barely louder than the breeze. The question froze the air. Anita blinked, then tilted her head in mock surprise. "Oh, I didn't know you did spas," she said with a smirk. Karen scoffed, not bothering to look up from her magazine. "I think it's fully booked, sweetheart. Besides, it's a certain type of experience. Not sure it's your kind of thing." The words sliced deep, but Blossom nodded with a soft smile. "Of course, no worries." She folded her hands on her lap, her fingernails digging into her palm under the table. When they left without her, their laughter trailing like perfume, Blossom remained in the lounge, staring into the empty coffee cup in her hands. Sammy had said nothing, not a word in her defense. He had kissed her forehead that morning and left to join Promise in the golf section of the resort, acting as if nothing were wrong. That silence hurt more than the words. Around noon, one of the younger resort attendants, a girl named Mimi, approached quietly. "Ma, are you okay?" Blossom smiled gently. "Yes, Mimi, just catching some air." Mimi hesitated, then sat beside her. "They're not treating you right." Her voice was low, uncertain. "But the way the staff respect you. I've never seen anyone carry silence so strong." Blossom blinked rapidly, holding back a well of emotion. "Thank you, Mimi," she whispered. "Sometimes we let people write over our worth just to keep peace." Mimi touched her hand. "One day, Ma, that peace will belong to you." Blossom exhaled slowly. She knew that day was coming, but not because someone would hand it to her, because she would reclaim it herself. Late that night, when the resort had grown quiet and the wind carried the soft rustle of ocean waves, Blossom slipped out of her small room and walked barefoot toward the east garden. The moonlight bathed the cobblestones, and dew clung to the petals of hibiscus shrubs that lined the path. She found her favorite bench, the one tucked under the bougainvillea arch, and pulled out her phone. It rang twice before a voice picked up, calm, regal, familiar. "My daughter." Her father's voice brought warmth to her chest. "How are you holding up?" Blossom leaned back, her eyes searching the stars. "They haven't changed, Daddy, Karen, Anita, even Sammy. It's like I'm invisible until they need something carried, cleaned, or quietly obeyed." There was silence on the other end for a moment. "And yet, you're still there. You're still standing." Blossom smiled. "I am. I'm watching. Waiting. Not because I'm weak, but because I need them to see me on my terms." Her father exhaled deeply. "You've always been stronger than even your mother ever was, and she was the storm the world never saw coming." Blossom chuckled, a soft, bittersweet sound. "Sometimes I feel like I'm pretending, like I'm wearing humility like armor, and I'm scared of what I'll do when I finally take it off." Her father's voice turned firm. "When the time is right, don't just take it off, let it fall. Let them feel the full weight of who you are. Don't raise your voice, just raise your presence." Blossom closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I miss you," she whispered, "and Mama." She would have told me to serve them tea with a smile, then pull the table from under them. Her father laughed. "That's exactly what she'd do, and I have no doubt you'll do better." The call ended with a promise that the MD's meeting would be confirmed soon. Blossom tucked the phone into her robe pocket, rose to her feet, and walked back toward the building, each step a quiet vow. They had mistaken her for a shadow. But shadows only exist when something powerful blocks the light. The next evening, as the family gathered on the outdoor dining terrace for grilled seafood and cocktails, the conversation shifted from petty chatter to something that brought Karen and Promise to life: business. "I heard the MD of this resort is a young woman," Promise said confidently, adjusting his collar. "Hard to get a meeting with her. She's notoriously selective. But I pulled some strings." Karen leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "You mean you got a slot?" Promise grinned. "Tomorrow, noon, at the private executive lounge. We pitched the partnership proposal for our luxury housing estate. If we secure this, we'll finally have the clout to wipe out our competitors. Anita clapped. We'll be on the map. Blossom remained silent, quietly stirring her lemonade. Karen turned to her with a thin smile. Isn't that exciting, Blossom? Finally, something important happening on this trip. Don't worry, we'll let you know how it goes. Sammy nodded with a forced chuckle. Promise has been working on this for months. The MD's a big deal. I mean, from what I hear, she doesn't tolerate nonsense. Karen scoffed. All the more reason for Promise to go in polished and professional. That's what we do. We represent legacy. Her eyes darted briefly to Blossom, as if to say, you wouldn't understand. Blossom nodded, lifting her glass. Legacy, that's a powerful word. Anita snorted. Oh, come on. Don't start sounding like a motivational speaker. Blossom smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. Beneath the table, her phone buzzed, a discreet message from the resort coordinator. Meeting confirmed. You're expected to chair the session at noon. Files ready. She locked her screen calmly and returned her gaze to the group. They were so consumed by excitement that not one of them noticed the shift in her expression. The chessboard was set. They had no idea the opponent they were preparing to impress was already seated at their table, smiling, listening, and waiting for the final move. The morning began with soft music playing over the restaurant speakers as guests filtered into the sunlit terrace for breakfast. The scent of baked pastries, fresh fruit, and brewed coffee floated in the air. Blossom took her seat at the edge of the long table, quietly placing a napkin in her lap. Before she could pour tea for herself, Anita reached across her with a dramatic sigh. Oh dear, you're blocking the marmalade. Blossom shifted slightly, saying nothing. You know, Karen chimed in as she buttered her toast, maybe we should have Blossom handle breakfast orders. She's surprisingly efficient when she tries. Sammy laughed weakly. She's just helpful. That's all. Blossom kept her head down and sliced her papaya. But it wasn't over. Moments later, Anita reached for the pitcher of orange juice and tipped it, too far. A sharp gasp followed the splash that soaked Blossom's blouse. The cold juice clung to her skin and sank through the fabric. Oops, Anita cried with exaggerated guilt. My hand slipped, Karen clicked her tongue. Well, don't just sit there. Go change before you embarrass us in front of the waiters. Blossom stood up calmly, her soaked clothes clinging to her frame. It's fine, she murmured. It'll dry. No, go, Karen insisted. You're drawing attention. Honestly, you're too sensitive these days. Not one person rose to help her. Sammy didn't look at her. Blossom turned slowly, walking away, the laughter resuming behind her. But what none of them noticed was the waiter standing nearby, who had seen everything, who had stiffened when the juice spilled, who had instinctively stepped forward before pausing at the knowing glance Blossom had given him. It wasn't shame in her walk as she left, it was something else entirely. Something simmering just beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, while the family played cards under sun umbrellas and sipped frozen drinks, Blossom sat on a lounge chair by the farthest end of the pool. Her towel remained neatly folded beside her. She hadn't stepped into the water. Her eyes weren't watching the ripples or the clouds. They were watching them. Karen laughing as if the world owed her nothing but comfort. Anita flinging her hair and posing for selfies. Sammy leaning back, legs crossed, too absorbed in his siblings' approval to notice the woman sitting in silence a few meters away. Blossom rested her chin on her hand. She had given everything to this family, her heart, her loyalty, her silence. But none of it had ever been enough. Not because she lacked worth, but because they were too blind to see it. A young staff member approached, setting down a complimentary drink beside her. From the general manager, ma'am, he whispered softly. Blossom looked up. Thank you, Isaac. He hesitated before adding, permission to speak freely? She nodded. Isaac looked back toward the other guests. If you asked me to escort them off the property, I would. Right now. Blossom gave a small, amused breath through her nose. And what lesson would that teach them? He frowned. That you deserve respect. She looked back at the pool. No, Isaac. It would only confirm what they already believe, that I'm cold and arrogant. No, they must walk freely into their own humiliation. That's the only way they'll remember who they tried to break. Isaac straightened, a new respect in his gaze. Then I'll make sure your space stays yours. No interruptions. Blossom smiled faintly. That's all I need. And as the sun began to set and the family's laughter filled the air, she leaned back in her chair, serene. The woman they thought they had exiled was actually in control of the whole kingdom. They just hadn't looked up to see the crown. The next morning brought an unusual buzz across the resort. Staff moved briskly, clipboards in hand, radios buzzing with soft instructions. Karen noticed it first as she adjusted her hat at breakfast. "Seems like the ants are marching today," she said sarcastically. "What's happening?" A waiter politely responded, "The managing director is arriving for an internal operations review. The staff are preparing." Promise perked up. "The MD? Already? That's earlier than scheduled." "Yes," the waiter replied. "Her personal team just arrived. She requested the executive lounge be arranged in advance." Anita's lips curled. "Ooh, the queen cometh. Better not mess up your pitch, Promise." Karen chuckled. "I hope she's not one of those feminist types. You know the kind. Wants to prove a point instead of listening to business logic." Blossom took a sip of her tea, her hands calm despite the rising excitement in her chest. The wait was almost over. Later, Blossom excused herself quietly, citing a short walk, and made her way toward the main building's south wing. Resort workers bowed slightly as she passed, and the head of guest services personally escorted her into the executive quarters. Behind the heavy doors, her tailored navy blue suit was waiting, one she'd brought in advance and kept hidden from view. She changed quickly, pinned up her hair, applied a subtle tint to her lips, and checked the mirror. Gone was the woman they dismissed in the hallway and mocked beside dinner tables. In her place stood the youngest director the resort group had ever appointed, their next major partner, the decision-maker they had desperately sought an audience with. She looked into her own eyes in the mirror. "It's time," she said to her reflection. The assistant knocked once, entering to confirm. "The boardroom is ready, Madam Blossom." She gave a simple nod. "Let's begin." And with that, she stepped into her true role, not just as a name on paperwork, but as the storm they never saw coming. That evening, after dinner, Blossom returned to their shared room quietly. Sammy was already inside, seated on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone with his shoes still on. The room was dim, lit only by a bedside lamp, and smelled faintly of the cologne he wore every day. She closed the door behind her and stood still for a moment before speaking. "Sammy," she said softly. He glanced up but said nothing. "Do you not see how they treat me?" she asked, her voice calm but lined with hurt. "You say nothing when your mother insults me, when your sister embarrasses me. You sit and watch me clean up after them like it's normal." Sammy exhaled heavily, placing his phone down. "Blossom, not now. This trip is important for Promise's deal. Let's just not create drama." "Drama," Blossom repeated, her voice trembling slightly, not with rage, but with disbelief. "Is that what you think this is? Drama?" She stepped forward. "You've watched me be used like a servant. You've watched me be excluded, insulted, humiliated, and you didn't blink. Not once. You didn't speak for me. You didn't protect me. You didn't even see me." Sammy rubbed his temples. "You're overthinking this. It's a family trip, not some battlefield. They're just being themselves." Blossom's lips pressed together. "Exactly. And you've accepted that who they are is cruel. And who I am doesn't matter." He stood and reached for her hand, but she pulled it away gently. "Sammy," she whispered, "one day you'll realize that silence isn't peace. It's betrayal wrapped in quiet." She turned toward the bathroom, pausing briefly at the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." And as she shut the door behind her, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She stood in front of the mirror and reminded herself that some love stories die not with a blow, but with a silence that never speaks up when it matters most. At breakfast, the air was crisp with tension. Blossom sat at her usual spot, dressed neatly in a soft blouse and skirt, hair pulled into a low bun. The family chatted idly about the day ahead, with Karen occasionally checking her gold watch as if counting down the minutes. When Promise announced, "We'll be heading to the executive lounge at 11:30. The MD's team requested promptness. Karen clapped once. "Good. I want this meeting smooth. And no distractions. No awkward moments." She then turned to Blossom, smiling in that controlled, icy way that masked every insult as etiquette. "Blossom, darling," she said with false sweetness. "We'll need you to stay back during the meeting. It's very high level, and frankly, there's no need for extra bodies. You understand, right?" Anita added, chewing on her toast. "Yeah, it's business. Not really your thing." Blossom placed her fork down gently, her expression composed. "Of course, I wouldn't want to be in the way." Karen beamed, misunderstanding her poise for submission. "Wonderful, you'll be more comfortable by the pool or something. Or perhaps help the kitchen staff set up lunch. You're always so hands-on." Promise chuckled. "We'll handle this. Just cross your fingers for us." Blossom offered a thin smile. "Oh, I'm sure you'll get exactly what you deserve." No one noticed the double meaning. As they rose and began discussing presentation slides and speaking points, Blossom excused herself and walked out onto the terrace, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble. Behind her, Karen whispered to Anita, "Honestly, I don't know why Sammy still puts up with her. He could do better." Anita shrugged. "Maybe he just feels guilty. She's harmless after all." But harmless was far from what Blossom was. She stood by the balcony railing, staring into the horizon where the ocean met the sky. Her phone buzzed once. "Final brief ready. MD lounge is secured." She replied with a single word, "Proceed." Karen had drawn the line that morning. What she didn't know was that Blossom had already erased it. The resort's executive wing came alive with precision and reverence. Staff lined the hallway, dressed in polished uniforms, standing in silent rows as the clock neared noon. The receptionist at the executive desk adjusted the appointment plaque. "Private meeting, Madam Blossom Owolabi." Inside the boardroom, polished oak tables gleamed under recessed lighting. Notebooks, printed portfolios, mineral water, and discreet fruit platters had been arranged in front of each seat. Senior staff members moved efficiently, double-checking files and whispering final updates. As Blossom entered through the private corridor, every conversation paused. "Madam Blossom," the general manager greeted, bowing slightly. "All documents are prepared. The delegates will arrive in 10 minutes. She nodded, her presence calm but commanding. "Let the receptionist know not to announce me as the MD. Let them see me for themselves." Moments later, she stood at the head of the table, her tailored black suit sharp against the pale backdrop of the room. Her assistants placed the proposal folder marked Promise and Co-Real Estate Ventures before her. She opened it, reading the executive summary with careful eyes. Weak projections, inflated figures, short-term gains posing as vision. She looked up at her legal advisor. "These documents weren't reviewed by competent analysts. They've padded expected returns with unverifiable data. Strike page 9 from the record. We won't be giving them that much room to negotiate." Her advisor nodded, already annotating. The time came. She checked the sleek gold watch on her wrist, one her mother had gifted her just before she passed. "It's time," she said softly. "Send them in. And please," she turned to the team, "offer them the same courtesy they offered me at breakfast." A ripple of knowing amusement passed across the room. No insults, no revenge, just poise, power, and the final step into her truth. They were coming to pitch their dreams. What they didn't know was they'd built them on the shoulders of the very woman they thought invisible. Blossom sat tall at the head of the boardroom table, reviewing the final pages of the proposal in silence. She had switched into full executive mode, her fingers steady as she annotated margins, her expression unreadable. Around her, her team maintained a respectful stillness, speaking only when she prompted. "Their market entry strategy," she said finally, tapping the paper lightly, "it relies on exploiting underdeveloped land in coastal communities with minimal compensation. That's short-sighted and unethical. We don't align with such tactics." Her finance director nodded, flipping through the appendix. "They didn't even perform a risk audit," he added. "If the housing market dips, they'll collapse." Blossom took a breath, leaned back, and folded her hands in her lap. "They don't expect the MD to see through this because they've never had to convince someone who looks like me, someone they believe is beneath them." There was a knock at the door. One of the secretaries leaned in and whispered, "The guests have arrived, ma'am. They're waiting in the reception lounge." Blossom didn't flinch. 10 more minutes," she replied calmly. Let them sit with their nerves a little longer. She stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the main courtyard, her voice distant. When they meet me, I want them to experience the weight of every moment they made me feel small. Her assistant stepped forward. Shall we offer them refreshments while they wait? Blossom turned, the corner of her lip lifting slightly. Offer them nothing until I arrive. Let them feel what I've felt, disregarded. As the room shifted into preparation, she stepped aside and reread the cover letter signed by Promise. It opened with, "To the esteemed managing director, whose time is valuable." The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been mocked for carrying plates, yet here they were, praying for a seat at her table. Promise entered the boardroom first, his confidence visible in the way he straightened his blazer. Anita followed close behind, dressed in her finest corporate wear, clutching a presentation folder. Karen walked in last, wearing a polished smile that barely concealed her anticipation. "Good afternoon," Promise began, not recognizing the woman seated at the far end of the table. "We're honored to finally meet with the MD." The general manager gave a knowing nod. "Indeed, please have a seat." As the three settled in, Blossom closed the file before her and rose slowly. Karen's smile faltered first. Her brows furrowed and her lips parted, struggling to find understanding. "Wait, Blossom," she said, blinking. Anita's eyes widened. "Is this a joke?" Blossom's heels clicked softly as she walked around the table. "No joke," she said clearly. "You wanted the MD, you have her." Promise's face turned a shade paler as he looked between the staff, the branded folders, and the nameplate in front of her that read Managing Director B. "Owolabi," he stammered, "but how? I mean, since when?" Blossom placed her palms on the table, leaning in just enough. "Since before any of you walked through those resort doors. Since before you handed me your bags and told me to carry your burdens like I was made for it." Karen stood abruptly. "This is not professional." "Sit down," Blossom interrupted coolly, not raising her voice. "You're here to pitch a deal, not give another lecture on how beneath you I am." The room fell silent. Her team stood tall behind her. She walked back to her chair, sat gracefully, and opened the proposal again. "Now, shall we begin? Or have you already realized you came to the wrong meeting?" Anita's mouth opened to speak, but found no words. For the first time, Blossom wasn't invisible. She was the one with the final word, the final pen, and the future of their ambitions resting in her calm, deliberate hands. From the boardroom's sleek glass panels, Blossom had a clear view of the outdoor lounge where, just the day before, Karen and Anita had laughed while sipping fruit cocktails and shooing her off with mockery. Now, from the elevated space of leadership and power, she watched the resort continue its rhythm, staff moving with purpose, guests enjoying five-star luxury, unaware of the storm unfolding behind closed doors. Her eyes moved briefly from the horizon to the anxious hands of Promise, as he failed to flip smoothly through his presentation slides. She leaned slightly, offering no emotion, her silence louder than any rebuke. Karen, who had once boasted of raising perfectly poised children, now fidgeted with the hem of her blouse. Anita's posture collapsed more with every passing second. Blossom didn't gloat, but she allowed them to sit in the discomfort they had never spared her. She motioned for the proposal folder to be collected. Her assistant took it gently. "We'll review and provide written feedback," Blossom said. "Should a second meeting be necessary, we'll notify you." Promise blurted, "Blossom, madam, can't we just clarify a few projections?" Blossom looked directly at him. "No. What needed to be clear was the way I was treated before I ever became relevant to your agenda." Karen stood once more. "You're using this position to humiliate us." Blossom stood too, her tone unwavering. "No, Karen, you did that all by yourselves. I'm simply refusing to stay quiet about it." She walked over to the glass wall and looked down at the same poolside where she once sat in silence. "The problem was never that I lacked value. It was that none of you ever cared to look beyond the surface." She turned back to them. "Now you've seen me. All of me. And your business will be judged not by your charm, but by your content." With that, she stepped aside and opened the door. "You're dismissed." The staff outside stood straighter, watching with subtle pride as the Owolabi family walked out, shrunken, subdued, and finally aware of the woman they had tried so hard not to see. Back in the private family villa, Promise dropped his laptop bag on the coffee table with a frustrated grunt. Karen paced near the window, one manicured finger tapping rhythmically against her phone. Anita sat curled on the couch, eyes unfocused, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. "She humiliated us," Karen finally said, voice sharp with disbelief. "That girl, Blossom, how dare she sit in judgment over us?" "Over me." Promise ran a hand down his face. "It wasn't a prank, Mum. She didn't just sit there. She owned that room. The boardroom was hers." Anita finally spoke, her voice a whisper. "And we mocked her, laughed in her face, called her names." Karen stopped pacing. "She set us up. She planned this. All this silence, the obedience, it was calculated." Sammy walked in just then, the tension slapping him like a wall. "What's going on?" he asked. Karen turned to him, rage barely contained. "Your wife is the MD." Sammy laughed for a second, thinking it was sarcasm. "That's not funny." "We're not joking," Anita shouted. "She's the managing director of the entire resort chain. She reviewed our proposal like we were school children begging for candy." Sammy staggered slightly, reaching for the back of a chair. "She never said a word," he murmured. "She let us, treat her like a maid." Karen huffed. "Don't act like you weren't part of it. You left her to the wolves." Sammy sat down, burying his head in his hands. "I thought she just wanted peace." "I didn't know." "You didn't care," Anita said bitterly. "None of us did." Just then Sammy's phone buzzed. A message from Blossom. "You have 2 hours to prepare. I'll see you at the official feedback review. Wear your truth." Karen read the message over his shoulder and sneered. She's enjoying this. But even she couldn't deny the tremor in her voice. For the first time, their seats at the table depended on the very person they'd worked so hard to shove off it. The executive lounge was nothing short of majestic, floor-length curtains, ambient lighting, and a massive table carved from mahogany that commanded respect. Promise, Anita, Karen, and Sammy were ushered in by 2 assistants who offered no greetings, just motions. They sat stiffly, surrounded by a silence that screamed louder than any scolding. Blossom entered through the private elevator, her appearance serene, her outfit simple but impossibly dignified, a flowing silk blouse tucked into tailored black trousers. No embellishments, no labels, just elegance. She walked to the head of the table with effortless authority. Karen, still trapped in disbelief, rose halfway. "Blossom, what is this? A personal vendetta?" Blossom didn't smile. "This is business. Sit down." Karen hesitated, then slowly obeyed. Anita avoided eye contact. Sammy didn't speak. Blossom opened a folder and took her time adjusting the papers. Then she looked up. "Let's get something clear," she said calmly. "This isn't a punishment. This is accountability." Promise leaned forward. "Can we just explain ourselves?" "Explain what?" Blossom cut in, voice quiet but firm. "That you mistook my grace for weakness? That you believed wealth came only in noise and gold watches? That a woman in sandals must be someone to command?" Anita finally looked up, her eyes glossy. "We were wrong," Blossom nodded once. "Yes, you were. And you didn't just fail a business pitch. You failed a person." She leaned back slightly. "Now you want a deal. But to sit at my table, you don't just need good projections. You need character, something you all sorely lacked." Sammy whispered, "Blossom, I'm sorry." She glanced at him. "So am I, Sammy. Sorry that I kept shrinking to make you feel tall. That's over now." She turned to the assistants. "Leave us." When the doors closed behind them, she added softly, "It's time you meet the version of me that never needed permission to exist." There was a long pause, the kind that makes even the air feel heavy. Blossom sat with her hands clasped, her voice steady as she began. "You've known me for years, and yet you never saw me. Do you know why?" No one answered. "Because you chose not to. You saw only what you were comfortable with. The woman who served, who stayed silent, who gave without asking for anything back." She unfolded a document and slid it across to Promise. "This is your feedback report. The analysis of your proposal reveals overvaluation, questionable land acquisition strategies, and zero long-term sustainability. But that's not your real problem. Your real problem is that you've built everything on arrogance. And arrogance doesn't impress me. Karen folded her arms. You think sitting in that chair makes you better than us? Blossom looked at her plainly. No. But how you treated me proves you thought you were better than me. Anita swallowed hard, whispering, Can we start over? Blossom tilted her head slightly. Do you deserve that? Anita dropped her gaze, the silence speaking for her. Blossom turned to Sammy. You had every chance to stand by me, to stand up for me, but you chose their comfort over my dignity. Sammy looked shattered. I was wrong. I see it now. But please, don't shut us out. Blossom's eyes softened for just a second before sharpening again. This table, it was never about shutting anyone out. It was about reminding you that I belonged here all along. She stood slowly. Your proposal is declined, but that's not the end of your lesson. That comes when you leave this room and try to build again, without stepping on people you think are beneath you. Her voice, though still calm, carried the weight of every insult she'd ever endured. As she walked toward the door, the staff outside stood straighter, opening it for her without needing instruction. She walked out not just as the MD, but as the woman they would never again underestimate. Back in her office, on the top floor of the executive wing, Blossom sat with her legal and finance team to complete the formal rejection of Promise and Co.'s partnership proposal. The review wasn't just technical, it was thorough, intentional. There's a pattern, her financial analyst said, flipping through the data. They overextend on every projection. There's no cushioning for stakeholder protection. Even if we wanted to salvage it, we'd be tying ourselves to instability. Blossom nodded, her gaze focused and unmoved. Then we declined politely but firmly. And note the misrepresentation of valuation estimates. Her legal advisor added, Do you want to allow them an appeal? Blossom considered it for a long moment. No, this wasn't just about figures. It was about character. Let them experience what rejection feels like without manipulation or influence. She signed the letter and passed it forward. Make sure it's delivered by hand. No email. I want them to hold the weight of it. As the team exited her office, she leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of stillness. She wasn't angry, she was resolved. The air outside was thick with irony. A family who once laughed as she scrubbed dishes now awaited judgment from the hands they never imagined had power. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant stepped in with an envelope. From the chairman's office, he saw the footage from the security cam at the lounge. Said he's proud of you. Blossom smiled faintly, her heart warming at the mention of the board chairman, her father's oldest friend and silent mentor to her journey. Tell him I'll call him tonight. Her voice was firm, yet lighter now. She stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the resort's driveway. There, her in-laws were piling into their car, the letter in Karen's hand still sealed. They hadn't opened it yet, but when they did, it would carry not just rejection, but a revelation. The girl they'd trampled on wasn't just qualified, she was necessary. And they had burned a bridge they didn't even know they needed. Later that evening, while guests mingled around the garden bar for cocktails and live music, Blossom took her usual walk through the resort grounds, this time not to escape but to observe. The staff greeted her openly now, some with admiration in their eyes, others with proud smiles. As she passed the glass doors of the lobby, she noticed Karen standing near the reception desk, wringing her hands. Beside her stood Anita, visibly shaken. Sammy was seated quietly on one of the lounge chairs, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When Karen noticed Blossom, she straightened. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice uncertain, almost unrecognizable. Blossom regarded her for a moment before giving a single nod. "Here is fine." Karen shifted uncomfortably, clearly hoping for privacy. But Blossom wasn't interested in shielding anyone from accountability. Karen cleared her throat. We were wrong. About you, about everything." Her voice cracked. "It's no excuse, but we didn't know." "You didn't care to know," Blossom said gently, not bitter, just truthful. Karen's eyes brimmed. "I thought you were trying to compete, but you were just surviving." Anita spoke next. "I mocked you because I didn't understand your silence. I thought it meant weakness, but it was strength. Kind I don't have." Blossom nodded. "You don't yet. But you can learn it if you're willing to sit in the discomfort long enough." Sammy stood then, his eyes finally meeting hers. You have every reason to hate me. Blossom sighed. I don't hate you. I just don't recognize you anymore. The man I loved wouldn't have let anyone treat me the way you did, not even family. He swallowed hard. Can I earn back your respect? She looked at him steadily. Respect isn't given back. It's rebuilt, piece by piece, in silence and in action. If that's what you intend, then start by being honest with yourself. And with that, she walked away, not out of pride, but with the dignity she had always deserved, but never been allowed to display. Long after Blossom left the lobby, Sammy remained in that lounge chair, unmoving. The low hum of music floated in from the garden, but it felt like a world away. He stared at his hands, the same hands that once held Blossom so confidently, now trembling with shame. In his mind, memories collided like waves. Her quiet care when he was sick, her gentle encouragement during his business setbacks, the way she always made space for his family, even when they made no space for her. And what had he done? He had stood by while they reduced her to nothing. He had watched her carry their bags, smile through insults, and still serve them with grace. And he had done nothing. I don't deserve her, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Promise sat down beside him eventually. You don't, he said. But maybe that's not the point anymore. Maybe the point is asking why you let yourself become someone who could hurt her like that. Sammy exhaled, emotion choking his throat. I thought keeping quiet kept the peace. No, Promise said quietly. It just made you complicit. Sammy nodded slowly, absorbing the truth he'd run from for too long. He rose, walked out into the evening air, and found himself staring up at the suite level, at the light in Blossom's room. He had shared life with her, but never really seen her. He thought she needed him. The truth was, he needed her. Not for status, not for comfort, but because she was the only one in his life who had ever seen him through without asking him to perform. He took a deep breath and whispered into the wind. I failed you, Blossom, but I see you now, and I will never unsee you again. He didn't know if he would get another chance. But for the first time, Sammy understood the cost of silence, the weight of dismissal, and the ache of a love that waited too long to be defended. The next morning, the sun spilled golden light across Blossom's desk as she reviewed the final draft of the official letter to Promise & Co. It was printed on heavy paper, embossed with the resort's seal, and carried her full signature, Blossom Owolabi, Managing Director. The tone was professional, but firm, polite, yet final. In view of your submitted proposal and subsequent evaluation, we regret to inform you that your application does not meet our strategic investment criteria. She read the words twice, feeling no vindictiveness, only clarity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standards. For too long, she had allowed people to mistake her composure for compliance. This letter wasn't payback. It was correction. As she slid it into the envelope and sealed it, her assistant walked in quietly. They're waiting in the lobby, she said. Should I have someone else deliver it? Blossom shook her head. No, I'll do it myself. She walked through the corridor with measured grace, her heels making crisp contact with the tiled floor. The lobby was calm, morning light pooling over the marble, casting soft shadows along the walls. The Owolabi family sat in a row, Karen still dressed impeccably but visibly subdued, Anita nervously fidgeting with her scarf, and Sammy staring into nothing. Blossom approached without hesitation and held out the envelope. This is your official feedback, she said. Karen reached out to take it, but Blossom didn't let go immediately. I hope it teaches more than just numbers. I hope it teaches people to see. Karen's fingers trembled as she accepted it. We understand, she said quietly. Blossom turned to Anita, who nodded without a word, her eyes full of something that looked a lot like humility. Then she faced Sammy last. He stood but didn't speak. Instead, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of apology not wrapped in words, but in silence. Blossom said nothing more. She walked away without looking back, the weight of the past week falling from her shoulders like dust shaken from a robe she no longer needed to wear. Later that afternoon, Blossom stepped into the presidential suite for the first time in years, not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as its rightful occupant. The doors opened to reveal a breathtaking space. Glass walls overlooking the ocean, ivory drapes flowing like waves, in elegant furnishings curated to match her taste. On the wall by the door, her name had been etched in gold, Madame Blossom Owolabi, Executive Residence. The sight moved her more than she expected. Not because of luxury, but because of recognition. A young staff member, Sarah, stood in the hallway with her luggage and offered a shy smile. "We've arranged everything, ma'am," she said. "Would you like any changes?" Blossom stepped inside and shook her head. "No, this is perfect." She walked to the balcony, the sea wind brushing her skin like a whisper of her mother's prayers. This was no longer the place where she had been mocked or dismissed. It was the place where her silence had finally turned into song. Word had spread across the resort. Guests now recognized her, not just as a face from the dining area, but as the woman who owned the view. "Good evening, Madame Blossom," a couple greeted as she passed in the hallway. "It's an honor to meet you," she responded warmly, but without pride. She was not here to be adored. She was here to live fully, unapologetically. That evening, she hosted a quiet dinner in her suite with her executive team, those who had stood with her behind the scenes. Laughter and thoughtful conversation filled the room as they toasted to integrity, to patience, and to truth. "You didn't raise your voice," the general manager said, lifting his glass. "You simply stood where they never expected you to stand." Blossom smiled. Sometimes the loudest revolution is stillness. As the sky darkened into a velvet night, she stepped out again onto the balcony, alone. And for the first time in years, she whispered not to be heard, but to affirm. "I am no longer hiding." The next morning, the knock on Blossom's suite door was soft, hesitant. When she opened it, Anita stood there, eyes swollen, mascara smudged beneath her lashes. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Blossom nodded and stepped aside. Anita walked in slowly, her steps unsure, like someone stepping into sacred ground. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she confessed. "Maybe I don't even deserve to be here. But I needed to say something, for myself." Blossom remained silent, letting her speak. Anita looked around the suite, then met her eyes. "I spent so much time competing with you in my head, resenting you for things I didn't understand, for how Sammy looked at you, for how calm you always were. And then I convinced myself you were beneath me just so I wouldn't feel inadequate." Her voice cracked. "But you weren't beneath me. You were just beyond me." Blossom walked to the table and poured a glass of water, handing it to her. Anita took it with trembling hands. "You don't have to forgive me," she said. "But I had to say it. I had to admit it." Blossom sat beside her. "I don't hold hate for you, Anita. I never did. But you have to carry the consequences of how you chose to see people." Anita nodded. "I know." She wiped her eyes. "I think I've been so scared of being unseen that I tried to dim others. But now I see it doesn't make me brighter. It just makes me cruel." Blossom placed a hand gently over hers. "Then use that lesson. Let it shape you." Anita let out a breath, the kind that sounded like relief and shame all at once. "You taught me something," she whispered. "Not with lectures, with your life. And I'll never forget it." When she left, Blossom closed the door quietly behind her, then leaned against it, heart steady. Forgiveness wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered through the cracks left behind by pride. The morning Blossom left the resort, the air was still, thick with the scent of ocean mist and something more, release. She stood before the large windows of her suite one last time, watching the waves kiss the shore with quiet persistence. Her suitcase was small, packed with the same grace she carried throughout the entire trip. But she wasn't leaving because she was chased out or broken. She was leaving because the lesson had been delivered, and her presence was no longer a performance. She had nothing left to prove. Her driver arrived promptly, and the staff lined the lobby respectfully, offering her farewells with soft smiles and slight bows. As she descended the grand staircase, she passed Sammy in the lower hallway. He stood there, eyes wide, like a man desperate to find words. "Blossom," he began, Are you leaving like this?" She paused for a moment, then turned to face him fully. "No, Sammy. I'm not leaving like this. I'm leaving like me." He looked down, his voice barely audible. "Can we fix this?" Blossom gave a sad smile. "Some things don't need fixing. They need acknowledging." Sammy stepped forward, desperation creeping into his tone. "I'll try. I'll change. You deserve better." "I know I do," she interrupted gently. and I waited for you to realize that. But I won't wait anymore to live the life I was built for." He lowered his head, and she reached out to gently touch his shoulder. "This was never about revenge, Sammy. I just wanted to be seen. But I don't need your sight anymore. I see myself clearly now, and that's enough." Without bitterness, she walked past him, stepping into the sunlight with a calm heart. She didn't leave in shame. She left in choice, her choice. For the first time, Blossom didn't belong to a place, a person, or a family that tolerated her. She belonged to herself. Weeks later, the city buzzed with excitement as one of the year's most anticipated leadership summits opened its doors. Executives from across Africa gathered in sleek conference halls, awaiting the keynote speaker whose name had recently become synonymous with elegance and strength. When the moderator took the stage and announced, "Please welcome Madam Blossom Owolabi," the crowd rose in applause. She stepped forward in a charcoal gray power suit, her natural hair in a neat puff, her stride confident and unhurried. As the applause settled, Blossom stood before the podium, not to recount her triumph over humiliation, but to speak about redefining legacy through grace, identity, and resilience. "Leadership isn't about control," she began. "It's about clarity, clarity of self, of purpose, and of values." Her voice carried not just through the mic, but through every heart in the room. After the event, journalists rushed forward with requests for interviews. One asked, "How did you handle being underestimated for so long?" Blossom smiled, holding the mic with calm authority. "By remembering that silence is not absence. It's often the seed of transformation." I didn't shout. I didn't retaliate. I simply endured until it was my time to speak, and when I did, I had something to say. That moment went viral. Her story, once invisible, now inspired millions. But fame was never the goal. Her true reward was the quiet peace that settled over her life like morning light. Back at home, she opened her journal and wrote one sentence. "They looked down on me, but I stood anyway." As she closed the book and stared out the window, her phone buzzed with a message from a women's leadership school requesting her mentorship. Blossom smiled to herself. She would answer, but not tonight. Tonight, she would rest. Not because she was weary, but because she had finally arrived at the life she had long been denied. One built not on permission, but on power, purpose, and profound self-worth. Here's the Bible verse, Proverbs 31, verse 25. "She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come." This verse captures Blossom's inner resilience. Despite humiliation and disregard, she remained rooted in quiet dignity. She didn't seek vengeance. She stood in her truth and let her character speak for her. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength waiting for its moment. Moral of the story: never mistake quietness for insignificance. Some people walk in silence not because they lack power, but because they are building something that cannot be shaken. Respect all people, not for their titles, but for their humanity, because the one you look down on today might be the one deciding your tomorrow. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.